Anything you've got that you've been waiting to pull the trigger
That I
on?
need, no. That I want, maybe.
It is time to finalize your research and get ready to buy.
Sells for $19.95 when you get
last-minute Christmas gifts for
Shop Best Buy.
Stop. One of my top students.
Black
How do I
Friday.
stop buying crap I don't need?
In the Fetishism of Commodities and the Secret Thereof, for the infamous Capital Volume 1, Karl Marx argues against capitalism and consumerism through the use of a term, commodity fetishism. I have found that while Marx's explanation of his critique is intriguing, it falls short of both analyzing the entirety of issues surrounding consumerism while also failing to make a convincing argument for why we should abstain from consumerism as a society. Thus, I shall argue that Karl Marx's The Fetishism of Commodities and the Secret Thereof fails to dissuade societal participation in consumerism, and I'll prove that while Marx's arguments may not be enough to cause societal change, we should still refrain from consumerism participation as a society. I will demonstrate my thesis first by analyzing what Marx meant by commodity fetishism, then discussing where Marx went wrong, next discussing how consumerism harms the individual, then discussing the societal harms, discussing what we can actually do to stop consumerism, and finally laying out some counter-arguments and responses to those counter-arguments. In order to understand why Marx falls short with his reasoning against consumerism, we must first fully understand what he means by commodity fetishism. When Marx uses the term fetish, many are quick to assume that he is using the modern version, regarding it as though it is tied to sexuality. However, Marx employs the word fetish using his traditional definition, which describes, quote, an object which appears to have a mystical or magical, supernatural power inherent to it. Think of something like the magical One Ring from the Lord of the Rings franchise. Knowing this, we can now delve into what Marx meant when he uses the term commodity fetishism. This term describes a tendency to engage in the illusory perception as consumers that commodities contain inherent value in and of themselves, appearing in a vacuum that is devoid of the larger social context at play, such as the exploitative labor relations between people and business. An example of how we fetishize commodities within a consumerist society is the fact that we have widespread knowledge of the exploitative sweatshops that hold up our fashion industry, yet we will happily trade our money for the products bred from their corrupt labor. If we walk into a department store and buy a t-shirt, we only see the finished product and the price tag describing its value. The commodity, or in this example, the t-shirt, inherently contains value to us, even if we do not fully understand what constitutes its value. We may think it is valuable because of what we can use it for, and we may be aware of the materials it's made of and that we can trade it for another commodity, such as money. However, we are completely oblivious to the production process of the t-shirt and, more importantly, those involved. We don't know who farmed the materials necessary for it, we don't know who assembled it, who shipped it, and notably, we are blind to the working conditions of any of the workers participating in its production. We are completely unaware of the social relations at play. We know nothing of the workers who assembled the chair, and they know nothing of us. In short, Marx is arguing that because of the key social relations that have been hidden from us, we are only aware of the relation between the commodity itself and the money we must spend to attain it. This disconnect that exists between us as consumers and the reality of the production process causes us to fetishize these commodities, assigning value only to the end result and not the entire process. This is Marx's overarching premise when he uses the term commodity fetishism, with the idea of disconnect and then appraisal. Now that we have a better understanding of Marx's theory, it's time to analyze where his reasoning has failed at dissuading active participation for consumerism within society. My issue with Marx's argument is that while he does a good job at analyzing the issue, he does not make a compelling enough argument that would warrant a societal shift in values, or, at the very least, an argument that would cause a perspective shift for a majority of consumers. Marx emphasizes that it is wrong for us to buy products that were created from exploitative labor relations, such as the aforementioned sweatshops found in foreign nations like India or China. I am not arguing that he is wrong on this point, however, I will argue for the efficacy of this argument for when it comes to convincing the masses to do otherwise. The reality of the situation is that while we should care about these exploitative practices, the majority of us simply do not care enough to make substantial changes. I feel that this can be proven by analyzing Australian philosopher Peter Singer. Singer argues that we are morally obliged to donate a larger percentage of our yearly salaries to fund famine relief efforts for foreign nations. He makes compelling arguments for why we should, stating points such as the fact that the distance between us and the foreign nations does not refute our obligation to help others in need. While Singer's utilitarian-based philosophy has amassed a sizable following, much of the Western world still does not practice this and also does not plan to. Connecting back to Marx, although it may be morally correct for us to care about these exploitative practices, many of us will not, since it does not affect us directly. Whether this is right or wrong, it is the truth. And this is where I take issue with Marx's argument. It lacks both a persuading call to action for the audience and a full understanding of why commodity fetishism and consumerism can be harmful to everyone. Keep in mind, Marx is not necessarily wrong, but he is just focusing on one piece of the pie when he should be focusing on the broader picture. If we are to convince a majority of Western society on why consumerism is something we should abstain from, we must focus on the consumers themselves. While Marx stated that consumerism supports exploitative practices in foreign nations, the range of harm that consumerism causes does not stop when it gets to our borders. Consumerism can be arguably just as or more harmful for the participants within it than it is for the people creating the products. On an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, British writer Johann Hari dives into the two kinds of motivation that people have in their life, these being intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is defined as the urge to do something for no other reason other than you want to or love to do it. Think of someone who loves to play piano in their free time or someone who competes in a recreational basketball league on Tuesdays. Extrinsic motivation is when we are motivated to do something based on external forces. This could take the form of a child pursuing a certain career to make their parents proud, or choosing one item of clothing due to the status that comes with it. Essentially, intrinsic comes from within, while extrinsic comes from the outside. Why are these terms relevant to consumerism? Meet Tim Kasser, a professor of psychology at Knox College. In an interview conducted in 2016, Tim was asked about his research into extrinsic and intrinsic motivations and the effects of consumerism for our society. Kasser states, quote, "We find that when people prioritize materialistic and extrinsic goals at a relatively high level compared to intrinsic goals, three consistent sets of findings emerge. First, the more that people care about materialistic goals, the lower their personal well-being. For example, people who have a value goal system that is focused more on money, image, and status report lower happiness and life satisfaction, more depression and anxiety, and a variety of other personal ills." End quote. Supporting these findings, a study conducted in 2009 that analyzed correlations between compulsive buying behavior and traits such as self-esteem or materialism found that, quote, "The compulsive buying behavior of participants was positively related to perceived social status associated with buying, positively related to materialism, and negatively related to self-esteem." End quote. The importance of this research is about how it relates to the harms of consumerism for individuals. A large part of consumerism is following trends, obtaining items that others don't have, and getting the next biggest and best thing. All of these tenets derive from extrinsic factors, meaning that a lot of consumerism is doing or buying things just to impress other people. An example of this is the streetwear brand Supreme, who had a monumental run during the late 2000s all the way up to the 2010s. The basis for Supreme's success was the idea that by owning one of their products, you would gain higher status and would be one of the few to be able to flex their exclusive logo. This hype grew exponentially, leading to the production of items such as the Supreme Brick or the Supreme Crowbar. And believe it or not, masses of people would line up, eager to spend their money to get the next big thing. Since then, the hype has completely died down, causing me to ask the question, how likely is it that buyers of these items are still happy about their purchase? I would have to guess that nearly everyone who initially bought it has either sold it or completely forgot about it. This is what consumerism culture does to people. It makes us susceptible to ignoring logic, living beyond our means, and causes us to prioritize extrinsic reasons over intrinsic, i.e., our true desires that will make us happy and fulfilled. After learning of this, the question to be asked is this: if individuals are being harmed by consumerism, how does it affect our society? The key idea that Marx failed to discuss within his paper was the fact that the practice of consumerism and commodity fetishism has an extremely wide range of harms, not just the fact that it creates exploitative working conditions. Following off the idea of extrinsic motivators, we can look at how our growing tendency to base our lives on these outside motivations has shaped the very world around us. A large and prevalent issue that consumerism has caused for our society is a growing homogeny between people, places, and things. Within the restaurant industry, large franchises such as McDonald's or Subway monopolize small towns, sometimes building multiple locations within a few kilometers of each other. These franchises draw customers and money away from independent locations, which usually serve food that is healthier, tastier, and more interesting, while also being a sentimental spot for frequent visitors. After time, these independent spots will not be able to compete with the franchises, leaving them to either raise their prices above what they want or to shut down entirely. Through our focus on consumerism, we are losing quality within our society during the chase for quantity and relevancy. We can see this in other areas too, such as the fashion industry, where people gravitate to certain brands not because they really enjoy the quality or the actual brand itself, but because they feel like they are fitting the mold. Overall, the homogeny that is present will continue to grow, and not just in the restaurant or fashion industry. Consumerism will stay relevant only if we keep focusing on fetishizing our commodities. But what can we do to stop it? Consumerism is a mindset, one that has been pushed on us since a very young age, but it will only continue to exist if we let it. Famous philosopher Noam Chomsky says that small efforts such as boycotting do nothing but hurt the bottom of the company, saying that we must instead focus on uprooting the system of power. In a lecture given in 1992, Chomsky states, quote, "Why would decisions over investment be in the hands of private tyrannies, who for their own purposes would spend hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing?" End quote. The issue is that these massive corporations did not just start spending billions of dollars on marketing one day. They gradually kept putting more money in based on the results they saw year by year. We must cause a shift in the data that they are receiving. We must lessen our spending on commodities that we don't care about in a day, a month, or a year, and we must stop putting so much emphasis or fetish onto these commodities. If we stop responding to the ad campaigns, less will happen at a lower frequency. If we stop indulging in fast fashion trends, we will actively be pushing against the existence of sweatshops and bad working conditions for foreigners. If we focus more on connecting with our place of living and its history, we may find that we prefer going to a local cafe rather than McDonald's. By focusing on diminishing one part of the consumerist structure at a time, we will help to lessen all aspects of consumerism and slowly grow out of this mindset and get back to our roots. An objection to my critiques on Marx would probably go something like this. I read Marx, and he has led me to being less of a consumer and more appreciative of the commodities in my life. Who are you to say that his work is not convincing? My response would simply be that just because one person did it does not mean that Marx still did not utterly fail to dissuade consumerism for the majority of society. Die-hard Marxists would undoubtedly be convinced by his every word, but that is not what is important when it comes to making an argument for something. The metric for determining success is not how many followers agree with you, it's all about how many people who were teetering on the fence you can lure to your side through your persuasive efforts. Marx fails at this, since the majority of people would not be convinced by his arguments enough to make a change in their lives. Another objection would be that Marx only meant to analyze the concept of consumerism and commodity fetishism, not to necessarily argue against it. However, I don't think this holds up, seeing as Marx stated that commodity fetishism came as a result from consumerism/capitalism, and the fact that he made some clear points about why it was wrong. Marx uses negative terms such as exploitative, which indicates that he is not in favor for the idea that he is discussing. If he is going to criticize a structure or a process, it only makes sense that he would be making arguments for it as well. And because of this, I think it makes him liable to back up his reasoning.